I had to realize no one was coming to save us. There was no outside rescue. And so what needed to change was me. The only thing I could change was how I was engaging with Luna. I couldn't make Luna's diagnosis go away. I couldn't force them to be different, and there was nowhere else for them to go. So I was going to have to change how I engaged with them. There was some fear around there's no outside authority that's going to fix this. But at the same time, it was something that I could do something about finally.
Jill Currie, welcome. Jo and I are very excited to have a chat with you today.
I am too. Thank you for having me.
Jill, we're kicking off with our question, which is, what is a key challenge or event that you've faced in your life, and why was that so significant for you?
The challenge that comes to mind for me, and when we were talking about doing this, is my oldest child, Luna, who uses they, them pronouns, around high school started telling us that they thought they had dissociative identity disorder, or DID, what used to be known as multiple personality disorder. And the challenge for me was I faced a lot of denial in hearing that and how I moved forward with them into that.
What was your initial response to that, Jill, when Luna said that to you?
I'm embarrassed to say that my initial response was, no, you don't. Honestly, I thought I knew a little bit about that disorder. I knew just enough to be dangerous, as it turns out. And what I thought was necessary for someone to have developed DID, the kind of life experience, did not match my understanding of Luna's life experience. And frankly, I was horrified at the thought that other people would think that too if Luna told them that they had DID, that there was this horrific, abuse and ritualized abuse and all the kinds of things that are in the very sensationalized stories about people with DID. And so, my first response was, no, that's not true. They told me even before that they were hearing voices occasionally, and I thought of schizophrenia right away, but their thoughts were very organized and they were doing well in school. And so I just kept saying, you're fine. There's no problem, essentially.
And what did Luna do with that?
They are very strong-willed, thank goodness. And it was hard for them. That denial for me and their dad both was really hard. We even strong-armed their therapist at the time into a conversation where she agreed with us that she didn't think that Luna met the diagnostic criteria. Luna is also autistic. There has been some thinking that it was not possible, maybe, for those two diagnoses to overlap. And so that was another strike against the possibility. And their therapist thought maybe they were just experiencing some sort of metacognition in an unusual way for an autistic person. And so Luna went underground with it a little bit. What ended up happening was that their mental health just continued to deteriorate. So they graduated high school in 2020, so in the midst of the pandemic. And that was a really difficult time, obviously, for a lot of people, a lot of young people. And their mental health just went strongly downhill in that period of 2020.
Yeah. So what did you notice in Luna? You mentioned that they were not coping or their mental health was deteriorating. How did you navigate that? What did you see?
We saw a person who was very depressed, not sleeping at night, sleeping all day, not leaving the house. They tried some college, but mostly online. So they were not leaving the house at all, barely leaving their bedroom. And we were having a lot of conflict. And some of that I just attributed to the young adulthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're wanting to more independence where they're still living at home. We're trying to navigate that in the midst of a pandemic and some other life changes. But also their behavior was becoming erratic.
Mm-hmm.
So at times their voice would be that of a very young child, kind of petulant and whining in ways that just were frustrating as a parent, not understanding, like, act your age, feeling sometimes they were very, very hostile I guess the best word for it, using language that they don't typically use, just behaviors that were very unusual for them. They would say sometimes that they hadn't done something, that it was more so in high school, that it was very obvious that they had done. And this was very strange because Luna is, whether it's a factor of their autism or not, I'm not sure, but they're exceedingly honest. And I've never known them to be a person who would lie to avoid getting in trouble. They would cop to whatever had they'd done and talk to us about it. So it was very strange for them to be saying very blatant untruths.
Interesting. So, Jill, what prompted you to take more action? Obviously, you took some action in the first instance by having your own understanding of what DID was. But what was the point that you went, this Luna is not right, that we need to intervene here, or not intervene, but take some sort of action?
Yeah, absolutely. They actually went to live with their dad and I are not together. They went to live with their dad for about 6 months. And it, two things happened during that time. I think the first was that my nervous system got a break. And although it was difficult not to have them living with me, I got some distance and I was able to work on some of my own anxiety. So I was in a better space. They got much worse when they were living with their dad, and they were starting to wind up in the ER some nights and have suicidal thoughts. And so that came to a head. They were in a lot of conflict with their dad, and they came home in probably November of 2022. That was when I knew, like, something's got to change. We got to do something different. I think the first thing was just acknowledging the trauma. So the trauma was the really scary word for me. What does it mean about me as a mother if I acknowledge that my child has experienced trauma, that I failed to protect them, maybe even caused them some harm through my own behavior? That was really hard to face, but they were showing really clear signs of PTSD, the not sleeping, the hypervigilance, the overreactions to small things beyond what was typical to their reactions to noises with the autism. And even before I said, okay, you've got DID, the first step was, yeah, there's trauma here. There's PTSD here. And so finding a therapist who was at least skilled with that was really helpful. And then from there, seeing how he engaged when this erratic behavior I started to realize was alters, the other identities that live inside my child's brain were, coming to the front and interacting with me, and I hadn't realized that. And so I sat in on some therapy sessions and got to observe that he, the therapist, took that at face value and engaged with those identities like people. And it gave me permission also to acknowledge it, because before that it was like, if I ignore it, maybe it'll go away. If I give attention to it, maybe it'll get worse, like old school parenting thinking. And so the opposite was happening. He was saying whoever shows up is welcome and talking to them and asking them about themselves. And that gave me some permission to try something different.
Going back, Jill, to you, you mentioned you had the separation from Luna when you went to live with the father. But for you, what I'd like to really explore how this was and what did it bring up for you, and how did you navigate that at those various moments?
I think honestly, there was some relief in the beginning. Luna and I were having a lot of conflict before they left, and I could not seem to calm my nervous system down. I don't know that I would have described it that way then, but I would describe it that way now. I felt this really strong urge to make them get up, make them do the things that were age appropriate that I thought they should be doing at that age. And I couldn't, obviously. And the more I pushed, the more they pushed back, and we were stuck. So their dad and I sat down together, and the back and forth had always been really difficult for Luna. I was the one who proposed, why don't they need to stay one place or the other to get a break from that? And I proposed his house, partly because I was doing a lot of the looking for therapists and paperwork for benefits. It just felt like an even division of labor, but it was a bit of a relief at first, until I wasn't seeing much of Luna because they weren't leaving his house. That was then their safe space. They had a hard time coming to my house, and I could see that things were getting worse for them and between the two of them.
Mm. But what about for you during that time? And you could see all this going on. I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but you almost went into a bit of a fight flight mode around all of what was going on. So, how did you navigate that for you?
I was working with a therapist at the time. That was helpful, working on my own anxiety with medication and with therapy. At the same time, I was doing a course in positive psychology coaching.
Mhm.
And that just was a happy accident that that was happening at the same time. It was super helpful for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, the focus on strengths in positive psychology and spotting strengths, which Joe is brilliant at. By the way, that's how I met Joe. Helped me both tune into what my own strengths were, and the idea that maybe I could bring some of those to bear on the situation, and then also helped me see that strengths that Luna was exhibiting. That was part of it, was that emphasis on strengths. And then the other part was that as a mother, I was acting as if I knew a lot about what was right and what should be done. And as a coach, you shift into a very different headspace where you don't have to know. You just ask questions and you just trust that the person that you're engaging with actually knows, has this innate wisdom about their own situation and knows what's best. And when you're dealing with teenagers and young adults, that's a tremendously helpful mindset, I found. And so I started practicing that with both of my kids. My son is 3 years younger than Luna. So it was great timing for him too. Those two things I would say from the coaching program really
Mm.
pulled me out of it, out of the spiral.
It sounds almost that you could be the mum in the situation and you could see all the complexities of that. But at the same token, you had that ability to stand and be more of the observer of what was going on, to be actually of support to Luna. Is that how you saw it in the end after you stopped to the point where you knew that there was something more that needed to be done?
I think the distance gave me that perspective. The other thing is, for a long time, we knew that Luna had mental health concerns. I thought if I just found the right therapist, we would be okay. And it became, well, maybe it's a residential program. If I just find the right residential program that they could go to and come back better. And the reality of our mental health system here in the States, the right place didn't really exist for a young adult of Luna's age who's on the cusp of child and adulthood. They're non-binary, so a lot of the residential facilities are male, female, and they're autistic. And a lot of their trauma comes from being autistic in a neurotypical world. Just the world is overwhelming, and so being in a facility where you're crowded in with a lot of other people and forced into a schedule, it just wasn't going to work for them. And so I had to realize, I say, like, no one was coming to save us. There was no outside rescue. And so what needed to change was me. The only thing I could change was how I was engaging with Luna. I couldn't make Luna's diagnosis go away. I couldn't force them to be different. And there was nowhere else for them to go. So I was going to have to change how I engaged with them.
Mm. It sounds to me that was the critical point. That was the shift point there, Jill.
Yeah, I would say so.
Isn't it interesting? It's you needed to bring it internal. You couldn't externalize it anymore. You needed to come into you and know, well, this is who I am, and I need to take that level of responsibility for my own responses before I can even start to think about helping Luna.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What was that like, Jill, when you came to that realization it needed to be something internal, that you needed to shift? What was that initial response? For many people, it may be fear. What was it like for you?
Hmm. I think it was both. I think there was some fear around, there's no outside authority that's going to fix this. But at the same time, it was something that I could do something about finally. So my strengths in the strength finder that we use in positive psychology coaching, some of my top strengths are love, honesty, love of learning, and those all came in handy. So I dove into research. What can I learn about this? What can I learn about this condition? And what might help? And honesty, of course, is facing it. It's getting out of my denial and recognizing what is. And just love was focused on rebuilding my connection with Luna. Our connection had been really eroded by my denial. And so I spent a lot of time just focusing on that. I went into it with the theory that a lot of their distress was disconnection. And if I could help them reconnect, they seemed to do better. If they didn't come out of their room, but if I could say, hey, come watch this TV show with me, or coax them out, the days would go better, the nights would go better. Then a big part of that was starting to connect with the alters and have those conversations and develop those relationships with these parts of Luna that I had been saying didn't exist and refusing to acknowledge or welcome.
Jill, from your point of view, what were the things that you learnt most about yourself in that process of reconnecting with Luna?
Yeah. I think the most surprising thing was that realizing that the parts of Luna that I found difficult to connect with were parts of myself that I find difficult to connect with. For example, we call them the littles, the young alters, that baby voice, that temptation to say, act your age. They were the first alters that I ended up connecting with. In some ways, they're the easiest because they're very sweet and they're, very trusting, and it's easy to know if I change my mindset and I say, okay, what would I say to a 5-year-old? What would I say to a 3-year-old in this situation? I know how to talk to a 3-year-old. I've had 3-year-olds. But the discomfort that came up for me, I realized was the same that comes up every time a therapist tells me to connect to my inner child. I'm terrible at inner child work. I don't like doing it. I realized okay, if I'm rejecting this part of myself, how can I sit with this part of my child? There are other types of alters, but the other type that was super challenging for me is the protector alters, because they are very, very angry. They hold all of Luna's anger. For the longest time, they show up in the middle of the night. They want to shout and yell, and I want to do anything those first 5 or 6 months, anything to get them to be quiet so I can go back to sleep. And that sounds really justified because it's the middle of the night. What I realized was I cannot sit with this emotion. This is really challenging for me.
What did you do with that, Jill? How did you start to sit with it?
Well, initially I offered a lot of medication. that was the pre. It was just little doses at first. One of the alters that kind of cracked this for me, he's 17 though. He was about the same age as my son. And so I thought, okay, this one I can wrap my head around. I can relate to. And I just started asking him questions instead of bolting, and tried to say things. It sounds like there's a lot of pain under that anger. Ignored the swearing, didn't take it personally, and just started asking questions about, what might this be about? Tell me why you're angry. I'm here. I'm listening.
Did you see any changes in Luna when you were starting to welcome the alters and having conversations? What did you notice in Luna and your relationship with Luna?
Oh, absolutely. My biggest fear was, if I acknowledge this alter, it will never go away. I'll lose my child. It was exactly the opposite. I'll never forget the first conversation that I had with an alter, and that fear of oh God, how long is this going to last? Are we ever getting out of this? Actually, we moved through it fairly quickly. That's what I started to notice, that once they were acknowledged and I could explore what's the need that needs to be met, we moved through those periods a lot more quickly and a lot more easily. I actually saw a lot more of Luna, paradoxically, the closer I got to the alters. So I see much less of them now than I did in the beginning.
And why do you think that is, Jill?
I think the alters are unmet needs and rejected parts, and those needs and parts get louder if they get pushed away and ignored. And lots of change started to happening when I started having conversations with them. Some of them fused or reintegrated they call it. Some are still here, but I have a great relationship with the 17-year-old now. I appreciate him. He's become much more protective of Luna and much less disruptive of Luna's life. He is very honest, but very tolerant of me, and we get along fine.
Was it both you and Luna unpacking DID and learning as you went together once you'd come to this realization, once you were engaging the alters and accepting that this is the situation for Luna? What was that journey like for you two then?
Well, there were a couple other happy accidents, I would say, that happened around that time. One, I was talking to a colleague, and I wasn't telling people, I wasn't naming DID, but I said to her, she's a very good friend, Luna's struggling with a pretty serious mental health condition. And out of the blue, not 5 minutes later, she said, "Did you know I used to work with someone who had DID, who worked for the same foundation that you and I work for?" And I was like, "What? That's what that's what Luna thinks they have." And it turns out this was a high-level, very successful executive at this foundation who got diagnosed very late in her 50s. And I said, "Do you think she would talk to me?" And she did. She agreed to. And so we had an hour-long Zoom, and it was just so helpful to see someone living with this condition. When we don't hear a lot about it, it's actually more common than you would think. It's as common as schizophrenia, for example, but people don't talk about it very much. It was just helpful to see someone living with it. And then she said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to be at a conference next week that you might want to tune into. You can tune in remotely to this conference." That was just really great timing. And I went to a conference all about DID, mostly by people who were living with it. I'd already done a little of this with autism, tuning out the professionals and tuning into adults with lived experience. I found that very helpful. It's just a different perspective about what works well for people. I had that same experience with DID. I was learning from Luna, listening to the alters, and also learning from people who were living with it a little further down the road than Luna and had some healing.
Jill, that picking up on the point that you tuned out to the professionals and tuned into those with lived experience, why did you do that? What was from your point of view?
Yeah, I shouldn't say I tuned out professionals entirely, but this diagnosis is somewhat controversial, even in the professional community. So there are some therapists, very few around here anyway, who are qualified to diagnose it or willing to diagnose it. And so I was very selective in who I spoke to. So at this conference, I actually looked to see, okay, who else is online from Washington State, where I live, and happened to connect with a therapist who was tuned in from Washington. I was hoping she'd become my therapist, but she and Luna hit it off. So she's now Luna's therapist. And she's very affirming, has the belief that trusting people's own sense of what's going on for them, not a gate. She says, "I don't gatekeep diagnoses." I like that approach. It makes sense to me to listen to what people think is going on with them rather than people who have not experienced something like dissociation.
What was the point where you got to that stage where you go, this is not well defined out in the medical world, so I need to trust something? Sounds to me you started trusting you. When did that start to happen?
Yeah, I think it was gradual, and it had everything to do with the results the approach was getting with Luna. There were a lot of times their dad and I did not agree on the approach to the diagnosis. I was reading a lot of the controversy and wondering if this was the right approach. I'm not sure my husband, who lives with us, thought it was the best approach in the beginning, particularly because part of the approach was removing all demands for a period of time and allowing Luna's nervous system to settle. I just kept saying to myself, to my husband, look at the results we're getting. Some of it's very, very obvious. The amount of medication was decreasing. It wasn't linear. It never has been. It's still not. But you could start to see the change over time. Not waking me up as much in the middle of the night. Getting to the point where Luna and I could disagree without shouting at each other was a big milestone. And later, about 6 to 9 months in, I was falling apart. I'll be honest. I was doing a lot and holding a lot. I was at my limit. I talked to Luna's therapist about it and had a meltdown. And she said, you're co-regulating for Luna. You know, you're using your nervous system to regulate Luna's. And that's great. And you can't keep doing it. You don't have capacity. And so I had to have that conversation with Luna. I was going to have to start pulling back. And the fact that we can have those conversations now, that our connection has been rebuilt, and I'm seeing their natural empathy reemerge and their logical brain reengage, that I can say to them, I cannot be woken up tonight. So what are you going to do? If you need support, let's make another plan because I'm exhausted. And that they were able to do that and find other resources.
Mm. So tell me about you in that period of time. What was your greatest fear for you during that time where you realized that you were exhausted, you couldn't continue on that?
Yeah. My greatest fear was that I wouldn't be able to keep doing it, that I had to hold it all indefinitely. Yeah. And that I would not be able to.
So how did you shift that? What did you start to do for you? Apart from, I hear what you said, you started handing that back to Luna and to father in terms of when they were together. How did you actually get to the point of healing you?
Well, I have another therapist now. Um, Again, carefully chosen, a therapist who is neurodivergent themselves and non-binary like Luna. I thought in the beginning that I was looking for a therapist that would understand Luna and save me a lot of explanation. As I started noticing how my nervous system would fall apart and these meltdowns that I would have and the struggles that I was having, and talked to my therapist about that, started to realize that I am probably also neurodivergent. That's been a big part of my healing process, is recognizing that this has always been a piece of me and it's always been that. So the parallel of rejecting the parts of my child that I don't want to look at in myself. So I did a lot of thinking and reading about autism for about 6 months, and then I did go seek a diagnosis for myself.
Mhm. Shining that light for you, how did that shift and change the way you were in the world?
I think it's still happening, work in progress, a lot more self-understanding and self-compassion. I think I always felt like there was something a little bit wrong with me. Some of it feeling sometimes younger than the people around me, or not knowing why things were difficult for me, that didn't seem to be difficult for other people. You know, I keep talking about my nervous system, but really that's everything. It's the key to everything for me. And so starting to recognize the ramp up and catch it and be kind to myself and say, you know what, you need a break, prevents that ultimate meltdown if I catch it soon enough. And I say, I need to go sit in a dark room for an hour, and allow myself that, instead of what I used to do, which is push myself, keep going, no excuses.
How do you catch it now? At what point do you notice that and what do you do with it?
It varies, but some of it is sensory. So if I'm on a Zoom like this, and I've been on a lot of Zooms today, the voices will start to hurt. They'll start to be pointy. I don't know how to explain it other than that. So I start to notice, oh, the lights are really bothering me, or my shirt is itchy, or just start to notice that heightened sensory sensitivity is part of it. Some of it is just emotional dysregulation. I'm starting to react to things that I wouldn't necessarily react to otherwise, or just fatigue.
It's interesting parallel that through accepting Luna where they're at with the alters, what they need, there seems to be a similar parallel for you accepting who you are. In the past, you would have pushed through Zoom calls where the voices are sharp and you were tired. Now it seems to be accepting you and giving permission to yourself. It seems to be parallel, accepting Luna, learning to accept and send the same love to yourself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's always been that way with us. I always learned things about myself through them. They're such a mirror for me. When I think about how I'm talking to myself, gosh, I would never talk to Luna that way. I need to look at that.
Isn't that fascinating? I think that's a human condition, isn't it? We look out and we can never treat people badly, yet we will treat ourselves shockingly. What's your greatest way of giving yourself what I call grace these days, Jill?
It's saying no to things earlier. I have this trick where I say yes to things that I absolutely mean no. And I know I mean no, but I drag it out to the last minute. And then sometimes earlier to the point where my body would have to get sick so that I could follow through on that no. So just noticing that earlier and giving myself the grace. Recently, a friend invited me to her 50th birthday party. I love this friend. I hate parties. And so I sent her a message and said, I would love to connect with you for coffee. And I hope you have the most beautiful birthday. And I will not be coming because I don't like parties. And she knows me well enough to know, of course, you're not coming. Rather than just waiting to the last minute or not showing up, it's kinder to everyone, to just be honest. Little things like I bought myself a pair of earplugs and I carry them with me everywhere. And if a movie is too loud, I used them this weekend. I was at a crowd and it was too much. So it just give me a little bit a break to put those in.
What you're talking about is this whole piece around awareness, Jill. Going back to even talking about Luna, in that state of denial with Luna, things were not going well. In fact, things were deteriorating badly. And once you became more aware of the DID, then you were able to support Luna more. And equally, you were paralleling that in some ways because your knowledge of who you were and your self-awareness, once that started to increase, everything in your life became easier.
Yes. I think so. It's still challenging, though. Those ways that I'm kinder to myself sometimes impact, or being honest, masking less, I'd call it, has an impact on people around me. And probably most particularly my husband, who's the kindest person I know and would not say that it's a problem. But I have to get used to admitting to him earlier, like, this crowd is overwhelming and I actually need you to just stand next to me or I'm not going to get through this line that I'm in. It's hard to ask for help. So I think I'm still working on that.
And I still hear, though, it's the changes for you that are most difficult. Your husband is so kind and he will do it if he knows, but if he doesn't know, he can't help. And it's that point of you coming to the acceptance of that. Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He always says, just tell me what you need. That's all I want. All I want is to know exactly what I need to do. There's a lot of people my age, assigned female at birth, people my age who are getting diagnosed now with autism. And the reason for that is because we were socialized at a very young age. I know I was, not to cause problems for people. So to mask and hide all that discomfort, and in order to do that effectively, I think you have to dissociate to some degree from your own inner experience.
Mm.
Reconnecting with that and getting past all the shame and all the socialization or those messages that we got as girls, that your own discomfort matters at least as much as the people around you.
Mm.
So what did the diagnosis shift in you or change in you? You said you're beginning to understand yourself through Luna, and then you picked up there was a diagnosis for yourself. But ultimately, once you had that diagnosis, other than the awareness, was there any other shifts?
Well, it's only been a couple months, so I'm still getting used to it, to some degree. I think the awareness and the allowing myself to be more myself. Um, Small things. I rock when I'm in line. I stand on my tiptoes and I pretend I'm doing calf raises, but allowing that movement, not feeling as self-conscious about it, allowing myself to excuse myself from a situation that's overwhelming.
Has it brought you any sense of peace or self-love or self-kindness?
Oh yeah, I think so. It's getting there. I can see it from here, maybe.
It's within the realm of possibility, Jill, now that maybe it wasn't before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Jules, out of all of this, what is the greatest gift that's come out of this for you?
I was going to say my relationships, and there's two. So the first one is my relationships. My relationship with Luna and my son now are so much better, so much more authentic, so much closer, so much less conflict. And with my husband too. I've always felt like he was the person I could be myself the most around, but it's more now. That continues to grow. But to be perfectly honest, I mean, the other gift that came out of this whole experience with Luna was I started writing again. And I started writing in part because I was having these middle of the night conversations with alters that who's going to believe this? They were so strange to me anyway, that I would wake up in the morning and just write them down because I didn't want to forget. And then it turned into a book now that I'm working on.
Wow.
So connecting with a lot of community, reconnecting with writers through that too. Having that restored my creative self is probably the greatest gift.
And just following on from that, how long had you lost your creative self for, Jill?
It came and went. I did an MFA, a master's in creative writing, shortly after college. Then I had kids.
Huh.
And working and having children and then going through a divorce, it was pretty sporadic. It hasn't been this big a part of my life since I had children.
Knowing what you know now, what message would you give that 10-year-old?
I would tell her to feel all the feelings, that there are no bad feelings, that there's nothing wrong, especially anger. She stuffed so much anger for such a long time, just didn't feel entitled to it. And I would tell her that your feelings aren't wrong and you're not too much.
It's a great message. Just to wrap up, Jill, what would your 3 top tips be for someone that, and I guess I want to focus on you in this in terms of going through a very strong, challenging event that would help?
It's interesting because I thought about this a little bit ahead of time, but sort of more about Luna. The biggest one is to get support for yourself. It's very hard to change the inside of your own head just by staying inside of your own head. Therapists have been essential to my journey all throughout. It's really hard to have compassion for other people if we don't have that for ourselves. Therapists really helped me develop that compassion for myself so that I could look more honestly at my role in all this, make those changes.
Seeking support is often something that we don't choose to do very readily. It can make a huge difference. Self-compassion, as you quite rightly said, is something amazing. So you said you thought about it from Luna's perspective. So what are the 3 things that you would say from Luna's perspective?
Well, I think it works for both. Finding community, listening to adults who are living with the condition, whatever it is. Listening to adults with autism helped when I was a parent, when I just thought I was only a parent of a child with autism. Seeking that community as I was thinking about my own potential neurodivergence, I got on some Facebook groups for late diagnosed women and found that they were my people. I wasn't alone. I wasn't this bizarre anomaly, that there were people who felt like I did. Then you meet some people who are slightly further along in their journey. You can learn from them. You can learn from the people who are not quite as far along in their journey sometimes. Finding that community and that lived experience is just, there's no replacement for it.
You said it beautifully. It's that sense of you're not alone. So many times we traverse all sorts of things in life that are really challenging, and yet often we feel that there's not another human being on earth that could possibly be going through what we're going through, and yet there always is. So what a beautiful way to finish off, Jill, with that lovely thought that none of us are alone and there's always someone out there that can be of support. Thanks so much for spending the time with Jo and I today.
Yeah, thank you both for having me.
Okay, that's our episode for today of What's Fear Got to Do with It. Thanks so much for your company. We hope you found it insightful and it left you with some helpful tips from our guests and some great points for you to reflect on. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Substack or follow us on your favourite platform. Leave a review. We'd love to know your thoughts. Maybe you'd like to be a guest or you know someone who you would like to hear their story. Reach out to us on Insta at whatsfear_podcast or email us at info@whatsfear.com. All the guests' show notes are below to find their tips. And until next time, from Jo and I, take care, stay curious, and keep the conversation going.